All right, everybody. Well, thanks for coming. It looks like most everybody that RSVP'd is here, so usually doesn't happen. So I just want to do a quick introduction to Regina. Everybody already knows her, but I just felt like that's kind of my role since she's a guest here. Yeah, I met Regina when you called me when you found out about Life Fest.
Right.
And wanted to interview Barry. And so we started talking, and we got Barry here to Denver, and we met for about 4 hours one night. The next day she interviewed him, and I swear she had known about Life Hustle for 20 years. Amazing interviewer. I can't even tell you how much I brag on her. I was like, she can learn about something in 4 hours and talk to you about it like she's known it for 20 or 30 years.
Thank you. That's a very kind compliment. It's a skill.
It is amazing. So yeah, I mean, I'm just totally impressed with her. And on May 8th, she's going to interview Mary again on the Energy Genesis. So Ryan will have another deal. So thank you so much for that. Thanks for coming and doing the talk. I didn't really announce what the topic would be, but it's going to be on human origin.
Is that okay?
Oh, I'm so excited.
Yeah, nobody really knew the topic because I didn't send it out. I said, Regina's coming. Everybody's like, I'm coming. And I'm like, okay, we're full. So anyway, without further ado.
Cool.
Thank you. Initially, I think we had talked ages ago when I was going to do this about the future of healing, which is a lot of different people's perceptions about what that might be, based on a lot of the interviews with avant-garde healers and such that I do. But that you can probably find most of that talk through other people and elsewhere. And so I said to Gail, what I really hold most dear is the story, to me, the one of the most important stories I've come across in the last 30 years has been that of our human origins, and it's from a different perspective than I would guess most of you have been exposed to. There may be some of you who have had this exposure. I can say probably the closest thing to it, albeit it's quite brief in its explanation, would be some passages out of Edgar Cayce's work. The woman who channeled this information, as it turns out, they've traveled along on life paths near each other and around each other. They're known to each other as beings, as entities. She is much more private than Edgar Cayce turned out to be, although he may have been a relatively private person. What he ended up doing was not. And so maybe I should start with who the woman is, just briefly. It's a woman named Linda. You won't be able to find her online or anywhere else. It's a woman named Linda. I was a young news anchor when I met her about 30 years ago. And at that time, I think like all of us, I had jumped onto my path. I'd had some experiences and so forth. But now I'm like Patty the caterpillar looking to become a butterfly. So I'm looking for a guru. And so I was just looking for anyone with a turban, honestly. And so I was looking through the local metaphysical newspaper in Sacramento, and sure enough, there was a man with a turban named Siri Gyan. And I thought, okay, maybe he can tell me my mantra, and then I can become the butterfly. And as soon as I saw his face, my eyes tilted down to another picture underneath his, and it was a woman and man, Linda and her husband. And I locked eyes on that picture, and it was something, we've all been through it. I have to meet this person now because I'm not a very patient person. So I called her, and she put me off for almost 2 months, and she just kept putting me off. I thought, why take an ad out if you're not taking any clients? And it turned out she didn't really want to be doing this. Her husband had kind of discovered she had this capability, and she was more or less exploited and pushed into it, and she just happened to be, I didn't know what channeling was at the time, but she happened to be a profound channeler, still to this day, probably the most profound that I've seen personally. And so this very quiet woman had been kept under sometimes for 6 hours at a time without getting up to pee by her husband, who was insatiable in terms of his appetite for knowledge and questions, including lotto numbers. I mean, it wasn't all elevated by any means, but fortunately had a curiosity that was broad enough that he did ask a lot of the bigger, deeper questions about life. And so this was compiled into a little book. and it was direct. There was no translation. It was just the direct channelings that she had transcribed and put into this book. And it was a real jumble of affairs, as to who he was, who she was, who this was, and so forth. But in there was interspersed the story about the origin of the human species, just from random questions that were asked. It wasn't a linear story at all. It was pieces. But I was transfixed with it, as I was when I met the being the first time, because there was a familiarity to it, very deep familiarity. And when I walked into the room the first time I met Linda, she was already in her altered state, and she didn't see me. I mean, her eyes were closed, but the being was filling up the room, and I walked into what almost felt like a vortex. And there was nothing that was barred from being asked. Not everything would be given, but you could ask whatever you wished, and they would look at your capability of understanding in terms of the level of answer that you would get. And I know you're all familiar with that, either through channeled people or beings or gurus and so forth. So after getting a few personal questions put aside, and they were very deeply personal that I had never spoken to anyone about, and that's what they tended to go for. If they could see there was something in you that would be shocking and get your attention because of the detail and depth and personal nature of it, that's usually what would be revealed. I thought, okay, you have my attention. A normal reader wouldn't be able to see that. And so I developed the same kind of curiosity Fred had, and they invited me to start coming over. They had a little group, and on Sundays we would gather and we could ask the being anything we wished. So throughout all of those years, and I've had access to them, it turns out we all have our soul group. I'm part of that same soul group. That's why that all came together that way. And I've stayed in connection with them through all these years, mostly through Linda, some on my own. But nothing captivated me more. I mean, personal information is nice to have if it's helpful, but nothing captivated me more than the story of our human origins. And the reason I was so captivated by it was that there was a grace in it that no other story has supplied. So, on with the story of the origins. They were explaining that the earth itself, as in all creations, no Big Bang Theory. They said no Big Bang Theory. Everything is driven by intelligence. And intelligence creates the effect, which draws together, whichever dimensional field it is, draws together the creation, and stepping down into physicality. In this case, it would be the various elements and so forth, and the winds and the vibrating effects of the time. There was all of that moving very slowly at a, I think they didn't really like the hierarchical nature of high and low, but it would have been at a finer rate of speed, quick rate of speed in a finer field. And I'm sure some of you have probably read texts where in ancient times the frequencies were different. People lived longer lives. Everything was different. Our size of our bodies was quite different. It seemed that there was less gravitational effect. So along that line, they said that over the long period of time of the Earth's creation, of its life forms, which was interesting in and of itself, and it was a co-created experience like everything in the universe, and there's a type of beauty, balance, symmetry. They said actually chaos is not as common as one would think. When you go into universal creation, there's usually a thought, a plan, symmetry of some kind behind it all. They said, however, there was this experience here that was developing that was not normal, and they said that anomaly became known as, they called it simply a portal. I'm sure many of you have heard of different portal type stories before. I mean, has anybody heard of a portal type story? Yeah. Okay. So in this sense, the portal was simply an area of plasticity, they explained, that allowed for a permeability for beings that already existed in one place to be able to see through into another developing world. And so that's really critical. That's the critical part of the story. That's where we begin. So they said that these beings that were in the other dimensional field were known for their creative abilities. They said if you were to look at one, it would be as a shimmer of electricity, just slight color and electricity. That is how it would appear in physicality. But that it had the potential, the beings had the potential in this more non-physical, what we would call non-physical reality, to create at the speed of thought and willfully whatever their creation was, they were able to create that very rapidly. It was just, there was no resistance to creation in that realm. And they were, simply because they could, this was not a plan, it was more chaotic in nature. Because they could peer through this area of permeability between these dimensions, they were intrigued with what was growing here, what was coming into form, into density. So this, they said, happened over a very, very long period of time. There was this period of observation, there was a period where beings would start coming over, migrating over, and just sniffing around a little bit, feeling it, maybe for the experience of seeing what something with a little more physicality was like. And this is where Edgar Cayce's work comes in. That's kind of where the story picks up. They came over, they played, they got stuck, and end of story. Okay? This story isn't all that different, but it's just a little more complex than that. And so as the beings were migrating over to this area of development, they began at one point starting to merge with the life forms that were developing. And it could be something as simple as a plant. They said, in fact, in the beginning, the things they were merging with were quite simple. They were not complex life forms. It was just a feeling, something to feel and experience. Now, I don't know if any of you have traveled back into some of the esoteric practices of the deep past on Earth, but projecting oneself into objects, including inanimate objects, was part of what people did. And that was just practice. It was just practice, because we had the ability still to remove ourselves from the body and go and gather information, experience, and come back. This is what these people were doing, although they didn't have the obstacle of removing themselves from a body, because they were already, this was what they were, this shimmering force. As time went on, they started merging with more complex life forms. Now, at the same time, the critical part was that the Earth was beginning to slow down in its rate of spin. It was coming into a little more density. So the oscillation rate was a little slower than it had been when it first started. As we can imagine from mind, what it takes to create into physical reality is a step-down process. Mm-hmm. It was stepping down closer to what it is now. The beings that were starting to play with these denser forms, it was known at that time to them. I said, were these what you would call adventurers? They said, no, these are what we would call scientists. In our parlance, they were saying it would be a scientist. They were there for exploration and knowledge, and yes, some adventure as well. It became known that there was going to be a cutoff period where the beings were now having to actually lower their frequencies a little bit too much to stay and play in this kind of a game with the trees or with a fish or bird, whatever they were merging with. That was one of the issues. This was a slower rate of frequency. The other part of it that became an issue was that they weren't intending, there was never any intended consequence or harm to the beings that they were merging with. But what happened is with the more complex life forms, the animals that they were merging with, they were actually altering their electrical fields as they were developing, which was creating problems for newly developing species. Some of them became adventurous enough to start actually consciously altering the nervous system of the various more complex animals that they were merging with. Now this becomes a moral issue, and that was, they knew that at the time, they became aware of that. if there was ever a point where there was something that was unconscious or not as conscious as it should be, let's just say that might have been the point, and they ceased and desisted when they realized, yeah, this is really not fair. You know, they might think they're giving an upgrade to a species, but who's to say? That's not for them to make that decision. And so it was known, but now we're fairly far along in the development of all of the species on this planet, including a species that is basically what we are now. They said, the way we understand our evolution isn't accurate. There were many different types of bodies that were created and that were available at the time. And that you would say the vehicle that looks more or less like we do now was, they said you could say a very distant cousin of an ape, but far more sophisticated. It was the most sophisticated body that was available at that time. So as a result of the issues with trying to merge with different life forms, there came a time two things happened. One was a decision had to be made by those who still could make the decision. Many people couldn't make the decision anymore. It wasn't their choice. They had stayed so long in this field that was a lowered frequency, they really didn't have the option to go back. And that's the stuck part that Edgar Cayce talks about. That's a problem. They're a non-physical being on a physical planet, and they can't go back home. And there were quite a lot of them. There were a lot of beings in general that were involved in this whole process. The others had a choice. They could either embrace this and come and be part of this experiment as it became known unintentionally, and continue on and see what came of that. Then there were those who saw that there was a problem and who chose to come because there were those that had to remain conscious during this whole thing, because that is where things became difficult. When essentially the portal was closed off, the differentiation between the frequencies here where they lived and here where Earth was spinning was too great now. So that was done. There was no more coming and going. Except for some of the beings who came very, very early on with their consciousness intact. Some of those beings were able to go back where they came from. Others chose to stay just in connection on a non-physical level, and they became what were known as, they were the first set of guides that humanity had. And it was very necessary because they understood the dilemma, they were of the same origin, and most of the people, once the merging occurred, did not have their consciousness intact any longer. And they said, when they speak about it, it's a very sad day. They said no one knew what was going to happen. The consequences were, everyone did their best. One of the things that happened, and again, this took time, that the non-physicals were working with the structure of the human animal, and they did agree, that was an agreed upon species. There was an overt agreement between the two species. The animal part of us was going to be able to have expanded intelligence, and abilities. The other, non-physical, would have a home for Earth life. And so they did agree to do, again, electrical modifications within the body, so that amount of intelligence and electricity could simply run through the human, what became known as the human being, through that body. This was a massive electrical being that is coming into not as finely tuned and wired a physical animal. And so whenever these beings talked about it, whenever they do talk about it, they said this is just, you human beings cannot begin to comprehend the profundity of what happened. It is a very different kind of species because of this. It literally was a merging of two completely different species smushed into one. And no one knew what was going to happen. They could only guess. They did the best. Now you hear the stories that come from other sources about the Anunnaki. This would have been millions and millions of years later. But these stories get all jumbled up. Timelines get jumbled up. But they said the problem was known widely, throughout the universe. This was quite an interesting situation. both interdimensional beings and beings who were of a third dimensional nature, i.e. ETs, of an advanced nature when it came to cloning and that sort of thing, came as a result of the need for help in this integration process. And at that time, they said the vast majority of what happened was all done in the spirit of cooperation to try to see if they could help this newly developing and very dramatic situation progress a little better. So, yeah, you would say that the ET intervention, even on a physical level, has been there as long as humanity has been there, more or less. This wasn't an exploitive period of time, however. So now comes the time where the electrical system has been set, the agreements have been made, some people are stuck here, others have chosen to stay for the experience, others yet have chosen to stay to assist in the process because they're still intact. When the merging occurred, I still remember, the words so clearly. They said it was horrendous for most of the beings. If you can imagine anyone who has left their body and come back in, anyone who's gone into past life regressions into other areas or other periods of time, and you come back into the physical body, that crush, that density, that moving back through molasses or mud feeling. So anyway, take that times a million and you get what this was like. So these beings had no senses. They had no, if you're the most they were experiencing might have been a fish, for example. So they didn't have any real understanding of what it meant to have 5 highly charged means of contending with the physical world. They said as they merged with the physical body, 2 things happened, that the animal itself, the human part of us, was overwrought and panicked because it felt this massive electrical charge. This is in general. Every being handled it differently, but this was in general. Felt this charge coming through them, massive amounts of electricity, light, and so forth. They had been prepared, but not that prepared. And so these beings they said the heart was pounding. And as the heart was pounding and the blood was coursing, the being part of it was feeling all of this. Like, can we even imagine that amount of cortisol running through our body, after a car wreck or something? And they said, in addition, the worst part were the senses. The light was blinding to them to see light in that way instead of to experience in their normal way of experiencing light and electricity. The light was pouring in through what were eyes, and they had no means of contending with this blast of light. They couldn't make anything of the images even at this time. They said the smells were overwhelmingly horrible just because they were so dense. They were so strong compared to an electrical being, so to speak. And on and on. So what happened to most of them is they didn't contend well with the merging. It was highly chaotic. They lost their bearings, and more so they lost their memories, which was just as well, in a way. I think every single person here knows that split of that divinity, that spark of creativity, that thing where we witness beauty and we burst into tears and don't know why. It's so overwhelming. It's just the frequencies of the essence of these higher frequencies of beauty. That's the soul. That's not the animal, right? So we know the schism, and we also know the other part of it, which is as time passed, they didn't really even understand. There was no understanding of mating. There was no understanding by the beings of really much of anything. They were just trapped in this new situation. This is where the ETs apparently were very helpful. Third dimensional ETs came in and helped them to structure society, family, whatever we want to call it, just for the purposes of starting to propagate the species in some sane way. But probably the worst aspect of all of this at that time was that being had an agreement to stay in that body until the body died. Now you have 2 minds. You have the animal mind that is driven towards survival and contending with its environment, has its developed instincts for survival. And then you have this highly refined soul that is used to creating at the speed of thought. And so you have two completely different types of minds that are in one vehicle trying to function. And the idea initially was that the expanded consciousness and creativity of the being was going to be the controlling aspect, and that the instincts to contend with just getting through a day or feeding or whatever had to be done would be run by the animal portion of the mind. And what apparently happened due to the sheer, and every one of us understands this feeling, the sheer need for survival, is that the grand part of the mind which permeates every cell in our body, which we often call, and it can be called many things, we can say that's the part of the soul that transcends and leads and contains all memory. That part was just that part of the mind was set aside, and we went into a traditional, more animal survival mode, maybe with the ability to have an expanded sense of connection to one another that those beings may have had, but not the ability to create, to remember, to know where they came from, to remember refined principles. Only few had those. The ones who did choose to stay to help out, and the ones who was more of a choice, some of those successfully made it through this transition. And so over very, very, very long periods of time, they said time passed differently at that time, number one. Even in through the upper Atlantean times, time was passing differently. The species would occasionally begin to remember, as we read about in times of, most of this would have been in the place called Lemuria, by the way, the original peopling. The experiments, however, continued on well into Atlantis. And if anybody's familiar with the works of, say, Dolores Cannon, has any read? Okay. So you've read some of the convoluted universe stuff. That was going on. Now, by this time, you had other types of species coming for their own reasons. Some of them were more exploitive by nature. Some of them are still here and exploiting. Some of them are fighting amongst themselves because they say they shouldn't do that anymore. I mean, so it's always been this jumble because of our own amnesia. And we did come back into our understanding of something closer to the truth throughout history in different periods. In the High Atlantean period, which coincided with Lemuria, those ran concurrently. And that was in the upper portion of Atlantis. It had a few different stages of its demise. In that period of time, there was still a lot of the, original peoples and original ideas, and the ones who could remember still had the ability to use their creativity at that time, but that ended a long time ago. And as each of these epoch periods, we'd climb up and remember a bit. And it depends on who you were. I mean, how one's own soul contended with this, the rate of speed at which they woke up. In Convoluted Universe 2, there's a story in there about a TV lady, I think her name was Veronica, which was me. Dolores took me back, and I had not intended to go to that time. But it lives with me still, and always has, which was, I said, she was doing a regression, I said, yeah, I want to know what happened to my heart. I feel like I'm kind of shut down. And so I thought I was going to a bad love affair from a couple lifetimes ago or something mundane. And then I ended up in this place of alabaster and these columns and solemnity that was just awful. And I thought, where have I ended up? And I started looking around at the other women. There were 13 of us, the one, and then 12 of us, and we were the middle generation. And that was in one of the earlier Atlantean times. And we really had created a beautiful society. We had technology that allowed us to grow on the dark side of the mountain, abundant produce. I mean, it was really quite a lovely society in the earliest phases of it. And when you're in past life, you don't know any more than you knew then. It's not like you suddenly know everything. You just knew what you knew then. And I was cloistered for so long, I had a misunderstanding of what happened to that particular phase of Atlantis' demise. And I remember saying when it was getting ready to blow, it had been unstable for a very long time. I mean, for probably by this time over 100 years. Everyone was working with what tools they had technically and also energetically. Like myself and the women, we worked energetically. There were men who worked in temples energetically. There were ETs. You could see them floating about. They were working from the outside, trying to hold the region stable. It was a huge collaborative effort to keep it from essentially blowing. And at the same time, the ones who had the technology were trying to tame the energies. And there was no taming it. It was going to go anyway, but they tried. Now, that's interpreted in some cases. You'll hear people talk about how evil they were, how they were just carelessly playing with the energy devices. Not in this phase that I saw what was happening. They were doing what they could, thinking if it's rising, you try to stabilize it. It rises, you can tell the whole thing blows. That's what happened. That's what happened then. Well, other people saw the exact same thing. I found out later on. But the sad part was this. I said, I cannot believe we're going to sleep again. And she thought I meant I was going to bed. She wasn't sure exactly what was happening. I said, oh no, we're going to sleep for a really long time now, which is till now. And I was crying. I said, we ruined this delicate matrix that has been developed between the earth and the people and the sun has been destroyed. And I was very upset about this. And usually I get very upset if I even remember it and think about it. But the point is, it had taken so long to get that far, where we had a beautiful world again, plenty, everything. There was plenty of everything. We lived in relative harmony at that time. I wasn't aware. If there was disharmony, maybe on the outskirts, I wasn't aware of it because that wasn't my reality. It seemed peaceful enough in the highest day. That loss of memory, I understood why it was necessary when I saw that. And that made me understand why it was necessary in the beginning. If we were able to remember how glorious life had been, and we're left with this charred out garbage, basically, no tools, no nothing, at that point that land was trashed, it would be very difficult to continue to reincarnate on that same path. You know, you might say, okay, I'm going to make an exit out of here, go try some other planet, I don't know, someplace else. But to continue the process of incarnating on Earth and going through the journey that we've been on would have been very, very depressingly difficult. And so, whether it was by design or whether it just ended up that way, again, loss of memory. There were always, though, people from Lemuria, from those times in Atlantis, because it was known for so long this was going on, that made their way out. And now we've heard about this through other people's work as well. Some of the Lemurians, made their way to, the Yucatan and other places and so forth. So there are people who always did maintain their knowledge and have passed it on through these traditions around the world. Some of the more famous traditions in Tibet and so forth. So the memory wasn't always lost completely. There were the keepers of the memory until the time came where the average person, or at least the early adopters like us, so to speak, could start tapping back in for the usefulness of it, because there is no need to know this just for the heck of it. And so the thing that appealed to me in understanding that, the grace in it was, we're no one's slave. We're not a slave species, and I'm friends with all these guys, by now. And Michael Tellinger, David, I'm friends with all of them. They stay at my home. I love them. They're my brothers. But the way this was told is the only way that's actually ever made sense to me. Because we can feel that incredibly brilliant aspect of self. We can feel that light, the love, the purpose. We have all that. Yeah. That's not in common with the other animals on the planet. So the grace of knowing we're not a slave species. We're a species that is considered quite the great experiment within the universe. And they said, it is absolutely remarkable. You have merged into a whole new species. This isn't the kind of thing that's done. It's disorderly, it's messy, it's not done. But it was done. And we have gotten to this point where we could even have a discussion like this. From essentially, if you just look at our human roots and just took Darwinian theory to heart, animals. But we're not animals. We're only part animal. And that's the difference between us and the other species. Not that they don't have their brilliance, intelligence, intuition, and taking nothing away from the other amazing species, but we're a unique species. So that is essentially the theme we're starting to remember. And the remembering is what makes us sad, because you can feel, yes, God, it's taken so long, it's been so painful. And worse, we have been, we're not victims, but we have been taken advantage of. Our amnesic state has been taken advantage of. From extraterrestrials to the most terrestrial, right down to the advertising industry. Has anyone here seen The Century of Self?
Yes.
We're still being totally exploited and manipulated, and we willingly buy into it. So knowing what we truly are, this being that has the intelligence and ability to create at the speed of thought, and consciously start connecting with that aspect of self, you can't be controlled. Nothing can control you.
That's right.
You can only control the animal that's afraid for its own life. So, to me, it's a more gracious way to view ourselves, and it actually, in its own odd way, actually makes more sense. I've never related, even when I was a little kid, I didn't relate to the stories I was being told, either in church or in science classes. It didn't make sense. There was something missing because we had this uniqueness about us. So that story happened to answer that uniqueness for me. And so that's why it's dear, and that's why I share it with you, because our salvation is in simply remembering that the higher aspect of what we actually are. The animal's just along for the ride, a short ride at that. So that's it.
That's it.
It's a little ride. Yeah, it's something new to, mull over anyway. And, I always try to look for crossing points between that story and the other stories of the prevailing authors out there. And there are usually touching points. The thing that seems to be off is the timing. Where if you look at the Urantia work or Zecharia Sitchin's work, this is only 500,000 years ago. We were well on our way by then, but maybe not in certain pockets of the world. That's the difference. Life was forming here, there, and there, but perhaps for the beings in a particular region, life was forming only to a certain extent until there was intervention, say 500,000 years ago. And that's even Michael Tallinger. If you sit down and talk with him privately, it's funny. If you're attached to, and this is almost everybody, almost everyone I interview, perhaps myself included, if you attach too much to one thing, then you're forced to defend it. And in truth, these guys are far more open-minded and understanding of the complexity of what happened in the day, and also some of the benefits that occurred during these manipulations, these genetic manipulations. We're a genetically manipulated species. And we don't have any problem doing it to plants and to animals. We think that's just fine. Why would anyone else think there's anything different in doing that with us? It was just a house for consciousness, that's all. Just a shell. So there usually are connecting points. They're just off by maybe a few million years. So any thoughts, any questions, or?
Lots.
Feel free, we've got time. I think I did that in a half hour.
All creation in 30 minutes.
How is Edgar Casey so insightful about all this? Because he seems to be such an exception in the sense that he did so much, and it was all documented.
Yes.
And it was so profound and accurate. And how was he different?
I think he got out of the way. Like this channel, he was truly a clear channel. He just got out of the way. So whatever beings were working with him, and it wasn't just one being, they were able, they have the benefit of clear vision. This is not in this realm. I think he had that ability to be a very pure channel for information to flow through. This woman is exactly the same. She's like that. there were many, this is just one thing. We were told about many things over the years. But I think to have some orientation as to what we are is always a good starting place. And he was like that. Whereas so many channels, I don't even like the term channel at all because it's been so misused. Many of us can bring information through. We can connect with our own higher mind or our guides or something, and we think we're channeling. That's not channeling in my book. Channeling is like Edgar Cayce and like Linda do, which is you're not part of the equation. You're over there, and they're just using your electrical system, brain, and voice to pass on words of other people's understanding. And I think he really was that. Well, he clearly was that. Yeah.
So this history that we're talking about with the Earth, I assume that we're just talking about just the Earth sphere and the people that were here.
Mm-hmm.
How does that relate to the Palladians or the? I mean, how did they get to where they are?
Apparently in a more orderly fashion.
So then if that's the case, if they got in an orderly fashion and Earth is supposed to be special, what is special about the human species now? I mean, is it just the experience that we've had, or that humans have had through this?
Imagine taking a horse and an
Chaos.
ant and merging their consciousness and having people watch what's going to happen there. It's like, it is such a vast differentiation in consciousness that was merged together that allowed for this essentially amnesic state on a planet that was really, I mean, there are other planets that have abundance like this, but I think this is viewed as a real gem. Earth has so many expressions of creativity. Mm-hmm. And so the Earth itself is a jewel and a prized place to visit and experience. And then to have this anomalous species on it that is so brilliant, so creative, and has no idea and act like animals. I think it's very interesting to people. And some of the other species at different times, the Pleiadians apparently at one time tended to be a little more controlling in their visitations and then became more helpful over time. And, you know, if you look at Barbara Hanklow's work, it's pretty interesting, yeah. And so they're more aligned. Okay, I won't go there completely because it's way too controversial and I don't want to get in trouble, but you have very distinct genetics on this planet. And you don't have to look too far, i.e. the Pleiadians, to see where some of the DNA came from. Right. Some of the refining DNA. And we're only talking about refinements and, you know, subtle differences. We're all people, we're all here, we all have brains, we're all learning at the same rate. But these subtle variances inevitably had to do with who was helping with the genetic coding in that area at that time. So the Pleiadians have, you know, they have a strong interest in this place, but to my understanding, they did not develop in such a messy way. They're much more an integral species that developed in more normal ways.
Normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question, or kind of like a comment. The non-physical beings, they were a higher vibrational frequency, and they kind of were wanting to experience density, see what that was
Physicality.
like.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, what comes into my mind is when they're merged into the animal, and all the senses are coming into them, they might have this expansive ability to create, but they don't have to actually get a tool, cut it, make it, cultivate it, grow it. I mean, that's something that has to do with the density, and I think that would be shocking, that you, like, the actual strength it would take to, you know, figure out the jig to make the thing so that it worked.
I think it was very shocking, very depressing.
Yeah, I mean, everything is so slow here, and you have to figure out how to make it.
We know there are people, there are beings who can defy the laws of physics and who can create faster than others, if not at the exact speed of thought. I mean, supposedly that does exist. I just haven't personally witnessed or experienced that. Sure. But we know that we have very unstandardized processes of creation as a species. Some people just think something merrily and boom, there happens the next day. Other people are trying to get one thing and just struggling with it for a lifetime, and they die and think, why couldn't I make that happen? that's just down to each one of us and our own understanding and connection with our true selves. Yeah.
Do you see us developing a portal or creating the portal where we can then look back towards them and have that open communication through technology?
You mean the beings that we that most,
Yeah,
not everybody on the planet,
they're
most
looking
people
this
are.
direction now.
You know, we have apparently the military has certainly mustered some of this to be able to speak and to peer into other places. And even today I did an interview with someone who has the really basic technology to allow us to hear into other frequency ranges of disincarnate entities, for example. I mean, that much we know we've done. Will there be a certain technology where our beings can communicate back with the remainder of who's still there? Maybe we can already do that. Maybe that's a matter of just conscious intention and purpose. Maybe you can do that now if you choose to. So I don't know the answer other than that is pure consciousness, and if we're of that, why shouldn't we be able to at least consciously communicate back?
Well, you mentioned early on about becoming the butterfly.
Yes.
And we're moving into that very rapid moment of very quick evolution.
Yes.
So I anticipate that that's a part of that.
Yeah, but then we're a new species. We're not them. That's the difference. That's what they said. You guys can't even, they said you can't understand the profundity. You're not them anymore, and you're not the original ones. You're a new species in the universe, and you'll move forward in your own evolutionary path. Now, I can tell you some of what they have told me about that, about what our future looks like and how we're going to evolve. And in fact, this came out in Dolores Cannon's work again, which I was interested to see, because when I first heard it, roughly 30 years ago, I thought, I don't know about this. Now I'm open to it. And that is the two Earth scenario. And
Like parallel Earth? Is that what you're talking about?
but in a different density.
Yeah.
And so when they were talking about it, I think it was about 10 years ago, I heard them giving a channeling to someone, and the way they said something, I thought, this isn't what they normally say, because I was always there. I listened to almost all the channelings. I thought, something's different. And then I realized what it was. These two beings will never see one another again. They're done. It's broken. And so they were just giving kind words, and normally they're very purposeful. They're not about making you feel comfortable. They're just purposeful. And this was just a soothing kind of throwaway comment they made. And so that had me go back and read some more, and then I started asking more questions about it, of them, and then of course I was reading it elsewhere. So the interesting thing about that, and you and I have talked about it a bit, Scott, in the two Earth scenario, they said there is no punishing universe, there are no punishing gods. It doesn't work like that. There are just frequencies and learning, nothing more. It's all frequencies, refinement, learning, refining, moving on, trying something else. That's life. And they said many beings, the time for family group lessons in many cases has ended. And it started ending a while back. And definitely now. Because it's all frequency based. The Earth herself, himself, itself, has coming into its own state of being. And it has, we've all read about this, Greg Braden's early work, it's just raising its frequencies up into a higher subdimensional range. And they said, no, you're not a fifth dimensional planet. Doesn't work like that. Just like your species, these things don't happen. It's orderly and slow. Going from one frequency to another, you can't, if you're in the next dimension up from me, I can't see you, you can't see me. So no, we didn't just leap 2 dimensions, they said. You have made a significant subdimensional leap that you would say from 3rd to 4th dimension. And it's significant. And the fact that we can all sit here and kind of see each other means we're probably in that field together with the Earth, or we wouldn't be able to be here. And they said that's how it works. You can't incarnate into a frequency range that, if you want to use a hierarchical nature, is a 7th or 8th or 10th dimensional frequency range. You can't incarnate there. Your frequencies aren't of that. And until you refine them to the point they are, You can't go there. It's only a process of, the only gatekeeper is frequencies. And so they said, as the Earth has shifted its frequencies upward, the beings who have chosen to elevate their own frequencies past some of the more, they call them kind of the early lessons, like in the kindergarten level, which is simple. You just don't keep bludgeoning each other and do these horrible primitive things to each other. Meaning not learning. That's too much incarnating into the same tribe. And you'll see this in all of our tribes on Earth. There are certain lessons each of our tribes isn't learning very rapidly. Others are learning maybe a little more rapidly, probably more the blended tribes, probably more California, Colorado. You have beings that are looking for kind of adventure. They're looking to expand their thoughts and horizons. They're learning the basic principles, which is essentially be kind to one another. That's a kind of a really basic one. And so I'd say, like the people in this room, for the most part, we're mastering those we've mastered the simple lessons, and we feel guilty if we even hurt someone's feelings, no less, raped their sister or something. So they said through that kind of definition of frequencies, another Earth has been created, and it took place over a period of time. Those who are learning certain frequencies will incarnate well into that place. The range of frequencies are such that we'll accept that. And therefore, on both places, you have the ability to learn more rapidly because you're more among like-minded beings. So if you are learning baby lessons, and murder and such is still acceptable and part of that, if you're in a society that's not so highly textured, where you're experiencing this in your families and among each other at a more rapid rate because you're more like-minded, it's just a more rapid learning. They said there's no judgment on it. Everybody starts somewhere. And when those lessons are learned, they move on to somewhere else or here. It doesn't matter. And those who choose to stay with the Earth, you have to have refined your frequencies to at least the minimal level of refinement. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Well, I was upset at the time about Bush. I was upset about going into Afghanistan. I was really upset about the stuff, Federal Reserve. I was already doing this job too, as of about 12 years ago. And so a lot of things were upsetting me. So I had a fair amount of judgment going on about it. And I said, hand on hip type of attitude. Well, what about people like Bush, creating wars and all this sort of thing? And they said, it's an unfortunate thing, but on your planet, people have always learned best under pressure and pain. And it's created a great amount of good. And they said, it's not their intention, so I'm not saying that. But the unintended consequence and benefit of war are things like, some of the rights that have started just surfacing among Afghani women, for example. These things would not exist without our, going in for our own reasons, at least, Halliburton and Rudenbrown and all that. So they did what they had to do. But as a result, you've mixed it up a bit. You've brought a little bit of money, maybe some principles, maybe some lawmaking into an area that wasn't allowing parts of their populations to progress. So we can't view it through our eyes as always a bad thing. That's how humans have learned. And it also moves us around the planet. It puts us in touch with each other in a new way when you have movement of war. They're not saying this is a good thing, it's just how we have learned fastest. So, there's that element. And I said, well, what about the money? All these people suffering, the Federal Reserve, the stuff they're doing to us. And they said, these beings are expert in money. They have spent lifetimes learning money, how to amass it, how to move it, how to invest it. This is a skill set like art, child rearing, or anything else. Now, if someone has an intention that is fueled by perhaps greed, then who are you to say they don't have the right to learn that lesson? You have a right to make mistakes and learn your lessons. Every being has a right to make mistakes and learn their lessons. It just happens to have broader repercussions. But because it has broader repercussions, makes no difference to that soul. It's a soul learning a lesson. And they repeatedly told me that the one thing, if we could learn one thing on the planet, and that is to never judge someone else's behavior and journey. We do not know where that soul's coming from, what they've been through. What we're seeing might be huge progress over what was happening in their last incarnation, as bad as it might look to us. We don't know. Mm-hmm. And so again, there's that grace in it all. You're all here. Most of you got stuck here. And you're all learning together, and you can leave. We're not prisoners. There are other places to go. They said that what's so valuable about Earth and so treasured is that you can learn so much at any given time. They said there are millions of things to learn here. And I did sit in on a channel that was fascinating. This beautiful blonde girl, big sparkly blue eyes, like, wow, this is fun. And they were telling her, they said, yeah, well, you haven't been around here much. This is pretty much new to you. And they said, you're a very beautiful being. I mean, very refined being. And you've just kind of stopped by here for a little while. And it's the only time I ever heard her make a warning. And they said, don't get too caught up in the emotional affairs and create problems that have to be balanced later. You don't have to do that. You have a clean slate here. And they said that you came here because of the opportunity for learning and experience. Where you come from, there aren't that many things to learn. You've already mastered them. And so you're here to experience more. Another woman, exact same thing, I'm not going to mention who, and huge blue eyes again and blonde hair. And they said, where you came from, let's just say it's the equivalent of knowing about 3 things. They said, you really have to be careful here. This is good. Again, they warned her, do not get mucked up in these emotional bad decisions, because you don't have anything that you have to correct, but you will if you keep going in the direction you're going. She muddled it up terribly. She's going to be here for a while, unfortunately. But the point was, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of opportunity here. And for everyone in this room, we've already contended with a lot of it, and it's so beautiful. I mean, how can you not enjoy a planet like this, even if we think from time to time that controlling forces are winning out? Not really. If we just start waking up and talking to each other, we can get that thing back right away. And we can remove its influence on us immediately. Any one of us can. We don't have to be subject to it. It's a choice. You were going to say something?
I was watching your show the other day with Jerry Wills. It was a very fascinating show. But one idea I took from that would be, and based on what you just said, would be that they're still manipulating our species or in some form or fashion. Mm-hmm.
That's why it's really good to know who we are. And this is the interesting thing to me. The beings that are manipulating this species, that continue this folly, are oftentimes other third-dimensional species who have perhaps advanced thinking in areas materially, but not on a scale of consciousness. And they are not as refined as human beings. That's why it's so important to see that we do not remember. Because once we remember, I mean, just this little bit, this little conversation, if you know that and choose to unplug from their matrix, you're not controllable. What happens if a whole bunch of us become that way? We're unplugged from a system. We start creating new systems. And so, so yes, they're still trying to, and they are, I believe, because they're afraid. Whatever they think they're getting from us will be lost if we remember who we are. To me, that's why I do my job. I only have one purpose for doing it. It's just to one story, one person, one book at a time. There might be one little thing in one book that lights someone up into a new path of thinking beyond what they were, 5 minutes ago. Otherwise, that's the only reason to do what I do.
Oh, you are doing good at it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I can say this, I will say this publicly. Your work has influenced the consciousness of my family. We don't live where we used to live because we needed to go somewhere else for a higher vibrational frequency.
Good for you.
We ended up here. We didn't even plan on being here. So, and I know a lot of my associates also have followed your work, and you bring so much important things forward, and you are making a difference.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. That makes me feel good because I'm tired. I'm tired. I'm taking a few months off. I can't do this for a little while. I need a break. I need to just make cookies or something.
So scientifically, you mentioned DNA, and now with the scientific data that they're finding, that our DNA is only 25%, that we can actually change our DNA,
Yes.
because it goes DNA, RNA, protein. Now they go, oh my gosh, it goes back to RNA and back to DNA. So we can change that. So what you're saying with all of this is that we're going from an unconscious state to a consciousness state
Where
at
we
a
can
higher
co-create
vibration.
ourselves.
Right,
Yes.
and it is coming quicker.
Yes.
Not only with the people who know the light and know their journey and what they're supposed to be doing, but for us, I believe it's creating that bridge, going
Yes.
from that unconsciousness and helping people cross over to that higher vibrational frequency so we can create and make that electrical being connect.
Yes, I believe so. And we've already laid the Earth has laid the foundation, the cosmos has laid the foundation by shifting its frequencies. We're making that shift by our own personal paths of refinement, whether it's just being kind or smiling or meditating or doing something profound. We're making that shift. So the beings that are coming in and incarnating through us and our bloodlines now, they're coming into already finer frequencies. So they already have more available to them in their creation process. They'll be able to create faster than we were able to and more effectively. And so yes, we are co-creators. In fact, I had this thing happen. I met with a man named Werner Lowenstein. He was President Reagan's science advisor, and he says his only claim to fame is he stopped Star Wars. Other than that, he said he didn't do much good. But that was a big one. And but he was quite a thinker. He was from Germany, and he had written a book called The Touchstone of Life, and now he's writing a book on looking for the thing that differentiates us on a consciousness level and the way our brains develop. So twins might be twins, but why are they different? Why are each of us so different in the way we function, the way our brains are ordered? And he was looking for that thing, that differentiating factor. So we had dinner. I said, well, do you know the answer? And he said, no. And he said, but I will by the time I finish the book. You know, he was laughing. He was in his 80s, had a little beret, cute little guy. And so I went to sleep, and as I was waking the next morning, I heard the sentence, the organizing principle behind quantum consciousness in the human brain, the development of the human brain, is the intention of the soul. And that's the first time I realized, oh, of course, we're co-creating and engineering our own vehicle.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I hadn't really given it thought. That was a while ago, it was maybe a dozen years ago. And that's since been validated by other young physicists and such. So we are already in the process of doing that, of creating ourselves. And we'll be able to do it even more effectively as we go on. And there are certain things that we'll be doing by way of our lifestyle that will assist in that. And one of the things on the Earth that has already started refining itself, and whatever beings continue to incarnate there, when I would meditate, I kept seeing certain things, and we're already onto it. It's in the grocery store, green juicing, diets, and all that. I kept seeing green fluid, and so I talked to them about it, and they said, yes, this is, if you're drawn toward fluids, by all means, you don't have to eat a solid diet. You can start drinking more fluids, because your species, and green is really important, photosynthesis aspect, this will speed everything up. But they said your species will begin within roughly a couple of generations from now. We're going to start seeing the atrophying of the digestive tract, because we're going to be living more on things like algae and juices and green, and ultimately, who knows, you know, maybe a little green pellet a day or something. We won't need a digestive.
Soylent Green.
Our tongue. Soylent Green, no. There's a company that has that product, you know. Ick. So, so that is one thing that they did confirm. Well, and they said that's also why so many people now are having every kind of digestive ailment there is. They said this is in preparation, and some people are further along, because you're setting up your energetic DNA templates now for what you're going to be inhabiting in the future. And so we've already started changing that within the field, which is not compatible with the physical body in its current state. So a lot of people are having digestive problems. They said it's just a normal thing. It's uncomfortable, but eventually it'll just atrophy.
That's good. Instead of having to feel defective
Really?
because you're not.
Right.
You're
No.
like, oh, it's a good thing.
No, it's just a thing. I just hope we don't become hairless. I love hair. I think it's beautiful. Yeah.
He does too.
Regina, I was curious about your perspective on this. I've talked to a lot of different wisdom teachers, and they all seem to have a little bit kind of split on this. And so in this perspective of that all things that have ever happened are all happening actually in the now. So there is no past or future, it's all now. So with that kind of perspective, then do you think that it's already happened? The script is already written, or are we playing a part in creating through being a conscious co-creator and changing the potential outcome?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the basic template we are the co-creators of that template. And so I think we've already created a basic template, but the nuances, just like in our lives, our soul comes in with a plan, but you can take this road or this road. It's still a choice. However, if you look at just the basic function of entropy, the likelihood is everything you've been, what you've done in the past, the tutelage you've had, the kind of decisions you've made in the past, you're probably going to take that road. The likelihood, the odds are that's where you're going to go. That the field will collapse into that potential over the other one. But sometimes people just do really silly or fun or stupid things, and we change that. And then it may just take a little while to get back on the original program that we've created for ourselves. No one's perpetuated it on us. It's our own soul's decision. So I think it's both. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Do you think that's cellular memory? If we go back and we know that cellular memory holds everything from the time of conception to that light, to that being, to that soul coming in, then that's a cellular memory that needs to be released, and so therefore we need to vibrate at that higher vibrational frequency to get to that singular, I don't know, you can call it singular or billion or gazillion light, and that vibration to get to from that inside that cellular memory.
But again, I think it's a process. It's not anything that happens rapidly.
Okay.
It just takes place over a long period of time. And the one thing that these beings have said to myself and others repeatedly is, you don't really understand the true power of the ability to make decisions minute by minute. Those little choices, every little choice is the refining factor that leads to that. And a lot of places don't have that kind of choice. It's already highly structured, it's already laid out, you plug into the system and you perpetuate it. In other places, not all, but a lot of places. And here, the simple ability to make choices moment in and moment out, we are totally the creator of our reality. How can you even suggest that anything else, other than the facts we have been a little brainwashed and exploited when we're half asleep or we're in a state of desire that they can sell us anything. I mean, there's that. But if you just look at it in the purest sense, every single decision is your conscious creation of what you're going to be experiencing. There isn't anything else. Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I would like to say something. I think, I know we have so much power inside that it's easy for us to tap into any frequency at any moment, instantaneously. And even though we have forgotten, they are always willing and available to make contact if we have the deepest desire to do that.
Yes.
And when that contact happens, there's not a lag in time. It's an instant connection. So the past is really insignificant. But what's happening is when you touch that and you see something so profound and grand, it just pales, because now you're in this light language, in this holographic language that you're speaking in the universe, and it's so big that it really isn't that big, but bigger than what we think.
I agree with you, and I think that's just going to keep speeding up.
It speeds up,
Yeah.
but we're speeding up
Yeah.
if we want to. So it's the
That's
Ferris wheel
right.
that's going around, and if we want to jump on it, we can do it now.
And you see how the population is divided? Half the people are saying, yeah, let me grab that brass ring, and the other half are retrenching into very old tribal patterns, religious patterns, and so forth. Anything for a sense of security because they can feel how rapidly things are changing. It's really become polarized, but I think the polarization has to do more with our fear than anything external.
Mm-hmm.
And because we're not quite, we're still afraid to allow,
We don't believe it.
to have somebody contact us.
Yeah.
Because when they come and they're asking, the first thing that we go into is a conditioning.
Right.
And the condition is the problem.
Right.
But we can get over that, and once we get over that, we can go and be taken and be shown these incredible things, which was what happened to me. And when that happened to me, it was like I couldn't even believe it, but it was so easy to just step over.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. I think that will be more of our natural state as we continue on in the future. And more of these little kids that we're seeing now being born. It's going to be an interesting time. Scott and I talked about this too a bit. The generation that's about 17, 18, 19 years old, the Scorpio generation, they look a little dark right now to us, but I think those people, when they light up, they're going to be pretty... I'm a Scorpio. It's okay.
What do you mean by Scorpio?
Oh, well, just what we read about, the hopelessness and some of the kind of darker practices of cutting and all this sort of thing that the young kids have been doing. Our generation's like, yikes. But Scorpio, it's the scorpion and the eagle. And so when that generation goes through what it needs to have to either blow off for the rest of us or experience that pain in those ways and starts maturing, I think that's the generation, your generation, that's going to really start taking wing. And that's when interesting changes will start happening.
So tell me if I'm understanding. So you're saying basically that we are the forefront of experiencing pain and suffering to go to a winged higher vibrational frequency?
I think so. I do think so, yes. And
I'm
because
related.
yeah, because you guys, Scorpios have a certain type of fearlessness. They can be horrible, don't get me wrong. I mean, Scorpio's a tough sign. But if they've elevated and they're thinking, these are fearless individuals that can, anything's possible. They can totally, it's about transformation. They can totally transform society, structures, the planet. So I have a lot of faith in your generation. I think that's where the big changes start kicking in, is when you guys are in power, when you have a say, and when you have children and grandchildren. So I have a lot of faith in you guys.
That's nice to hear.
I know right now.
Hurry up.
So basically, whenever Regina's here in Denver, she's 24/7. So we're going to respectfully kind of close this and honor her for her time, and let her go and get some rest.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
By the way, if you guys want to hear more of Regina's perspective and her opinions on things, I created a show with her on my website where I interview her every couple of months and we talk about different topics. And if you have a question, you can send it in too. But my website is Cafe Namaste, and you can find it on there.
Yeah, he does really nice work.
So,
Yeah.
it's